Dead America, the Second Month, The Texas Panhandle, Part 3. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 44. The group slept in well past sunrise. Not that Jackie minded it one bit. The last few days, hell, the last few weeks had been brutal. Between the constant fear of attack, fighting against the living and the dead, and constant trips across rough terrain on horseback. Not that life had been any easier for Axton and his crew. Being locked in a single room for 6 weeks would be enough to drive anybody mad, and that was before taking into account the only food available was uncooked things from a can. She contemplated that for a moment before shaking her head to get it out. She was the first one up, even though it was getting close to noon. She walked over to her horse saddle, which was hanging on the fence next to the pen the horses were grazing in. She took out a bottle of water, downing some of it. "Good morning, I think," Axton said from behind her, and she startled. She whirled around, taking in a sharp breath, and he raised his hands looking sheepish. "Easy now," he said gently. "Sorry about that." "It's okay," she breathed, nodding and hoping she sounded calmer than she felt. "Just thought everybody was asleep." "Haven't had a lot of good nights of sleep the last month and a half," Axton admitted. "Warm sleeping bag next to a fire in the fresh air. Too good for those boys to pass up." "And you?" she asked, cocking her head. He smirked. "Too good for me to pass up, too," he drawled. "But like all good things, they must come to an end." "Yeah, we should get a move on," Jackie said. "I know you're worried about your friend," Axton said slowly, shaking his head. "But if I'm being honest with you, I don't think Apollo is going to kill him. At least not without giving a list of demands to the town first." She shook her head. "He seems like a lovely guy," she said dryly. "How'd he get so high up in your ranks?" "Wasn't exactly my doing, if that's what you're thinking," he declared. "There were a couple hundred of us at our peak. He had a, shall we say, dedicated following. There were grumblings amongst the group that he was going to take his faithful and break away to start their own thing, only with no intention of leaving Dumas. I knew that would not be ideal." "2 gangs, 1 turf," Jackie said thoughtfully. "That's a recipe for disaster there." He nodded. "That was my thinking," he said. "So I struck a deal with him. He could become third in command behind myself and old Zeke, and I'd give him a little leeway when it came to some of the ventures he wanted to explore." Jackie cocked a brow. "Illegal ventures?" she asked. He smirked. "I wasn't exactly running a country club, you know," he drawled. "Fair enough," she said with a chuckle. "I'm not really one to judge, though." His eyebrows rose. "No, really?" he asked. "A budding criminal yourself, then?" She laughed. No, more like the occasional bar fight. Maybe a stolen wallet from a guy who decided it was wise to cop a feel," she explained. "Not the big time like you guys." He shook his head. "You should temper your expectations now," he said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "You might be disappointed when you see the gang." They turned at the sound of the other men getting up and moving slowly, rubbing their legs and shoulders. Likely sore from the ride after being cooped up for so long. "I swear I'm going to murder that horse on principle when we're through with this," Kai grunted. "Dude, you can't kill a horse," Arthur scoffed. Kai glared at him. "Is that a challenge?" he growled. "Because that sounds like a challenge." "Nah, man, Arthur's right," Carter piped up. "Horse is the best mode of transportation these days. If you don't want it, then somebody will take it off your hands." "Fine," Kai muttered. "I'm going to smack the shit out of it, though." "Hey, boss, you want me to whip us up something to eat?" Levi asked. Axton glanced at Jackie, and she didn't realize he was deferring to her for a beat, finding her stride and shrugging. "Can't go off fighting zombies and rogue bikers on an empty stomach," she said. The gang leader nodded and turned back to Levi. "Yeah, just something quick, though," he instructed. "We got a lot of ground to cover, and we've already burned a lot of sunlight." Levi got to work fixing up a simple breakfast with powdered eggs and some oatmeal. As he was working on that, everybody else got up and stretched, walking around to try to get the soreness out. "Hey, Jackie, how much further do we have to go?" Arthur asked. She shook her head. "Cactus isn't too much further up," she said. "Few miles or so. Won't be too bad. Past that, I can't tell you. Haven't been down to Dumas, but from the way the others were talking, it wasn't too much of a trip." "All right, it is what it is," Arthur said. "Going to depend on what we encounter, too," Axton added. Kai nodded. "Speaking of, how in the hell are we supposed to fight anything when all we have are bats and knives?" he asked, throwing up his hands. "Oh, come on now. Surely you've thrown down with people before," Axton teased. "Yeah, 1-on-1, 1-on-2, Kai scoffed. "None of this one against a mob shit." "There's 6 of us," Carter piped up. "We can cause some damage." "Yeah, well, you better hope we get something a little stronger to fight with before we come across Axton's buddies," Kai snapped. "Because I'd bet my bottom dollar they're going to have more than bats and knives." Axton nodded in agreement, but didn't push the issue further. He at least knew better than to insinuate there was anything anyone could do about it, so there wasn't any point in talking about it. "Jackie, you know of any place we can pick up some weapons?" Arthur asked, apparently not getting the silent memo. "Something that can help us even the odds a bit?" She shook her head. "Don't know the area that well," she replied. "There were a bunch of trailers in Cactus, though. Maybe we can get lucky and find something in there?" Arthur turned to face Axton. "What do you think?" he asked. "I know we're on a timetable, but might be worth spending the night in Cactus to do a search," Axton suggested, cocking his head to gauge Jackie's reaction. She opened her mouth, looking like she was about to protest, but closed it again, nodding a little. "Good to know you agree," he said, offering her a smile. "I saw what Apollo did," she said slowly. "And yeah, they have ammunition to burn. We're going to need something that packs a punch if you can't talk your way inside." Kai smirked. "With a golden god voice like his, I'll be surprised if a shot's even fired," he drawled. "Let's hope you're right, man," Axton said, shaking his head. "Let's hope you're right." "Come on, soup's on," Levi called. The group headed over to the fire, sitting down to eat and take one last rest before hitting the road. Chapter 2. The group rode slowly towards Cactus, stopping half a mile from the remnants of the traffic jam. They pulled out a couple pairs of binoculars and looked towards it. A significant number of the zombies that had been lured into the neighborhood had wandered back to the road, about 3 dozen or so. They milled about in the street, not particularly focused on much of anything. "That doesn't look too bad," Kai murmured. Jackie shook her head. "Probably twice that many in the neighborhood behind it, though," she said. "How do you know?" Carter asked. "Zane, she said, her voice cracking. "He pulled a bunch of them away from the cars so we could clear them. I don't think he killed many." Carter seemed to understand the pain in her voice, simply nodding and moving on. "What's the play?" Arthur asked. Axton contemplated for a few moments, studying the potential battlefield. The cars just off the road were scattered about, and the terrain was a bit rough once the pavement ended with rocks and holes. He grinned. "We're going to play some Marco Polo," he declared. The others looked at him, brows furrowed in confusion. "Care to elaborate a bit there, boss?" Levi asked. "We need to get into the neighborhood to look for weapons, and the fewer of those things there are, the better," Axton said. "I'll lead a group in, while the others start yelling from cover and take out the stragglers." Jackie pursed her lips. "I'm beginning to think you've never played Marco Polo," she muttered. "Yeah, well, there's yelling involved in both," Axton huffed, feigning being flustered as he crossed his arms. "Cut me some slack. My berries have been bouncing up and down on a horse saddle for the last day. Most of my mental focus is on tamping down that lingering pain." She chuckled, raising her palm in surrender to let him know it was all right. Axton tilted his head towards her. "Kai, I want you and Jackie to come with me," he said. "The rest of you, get to those cars and start laying the beat down." Everyone moved into position without argument. Levi, Carter, and Arthur found a place to tie up their horses, grabbing their blunt weapons off of the saddles and strolling up to the cars. Carter stretched in an exaggerated manner, as if he were getting ready for an aerobics class. "Man, what in the hell are you doing?" Arthur asked. "Stretching," Carter replied as he leaned over to touch his toes. "I'm not as young as I used to be, and we're in for a lot of swinging." Arthur and Levi laughed under their breath, but it didn't deter him as he stretched an arm over his head and bent to the left. "Laugh all you want," he warned, "but last time I checked, we can't go to the bar and down a bottle to numb our pain. We're just going to have to live with it." Arthur and Levi exchanged a quick glance before beginning to stretch themselves. They got into position with the trio of Axton, Jackie, and Kai riding around the north part of town. They crossed the street where there was still a pile-up blocking the road. "If we're staying the night here, we should consider moving these," Jackie said. "Why?" Kai asked. "Big mob coming up from Amarillo," Jackie explained. "Don't want them getting stuck here and lingering." "Who cares?" Kai scoffed. "Not like we're going to be here that long." Axton cocked a brow. "Oh, do you have some place to be?" he asked. The other man blinked at him in surprise, looking a little caught off guard. "I mean, no," he said slowly, scratching the back of his head. "I guess even if I could make it back home, I wouldn't want to go." "Well, since you're home, don't you think it would be nicer if we didn't have a bunch of those things hanging around?" Axton asked, motioning to the cars. "I mean, I enjoy house guests as much as the next person, but I'm not really in the mood for a block party." Kai contemplated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, fine, whatever," he muttered, though he avoided their gazes. "But weapons first, though." Axton glanced at Jackie, and she nodded, so he continued. "Let's tie the horses up here and go on foot." He motioned to a tree a couple 100 yards from both the main road and the neighborhood. "I don't think any of us are too sure on these things, so don't want to get bucked if we come across some zombies." They tied up the horses, disembarked, and grabbed their weapons. They spread a few yards away from each other, tapping their weapons on their hands in anticipation of using them. They didn't have to wait long, as the noise from their horses grunting and neighing had attracted the attention of a trio of zombies coming out from the side of one of the trailers. "That didn't take long," Kai said. The ghouls shambled towards them, moaning loudly. This attracted a couple more who came out of the open door of the trailer, the first one tumbling to the ground and face-planting, not being able to traverse the couple of short stairs at the front. The three leapt into action, making quick and decisive blows against their undead enemies. As they crumpled to the ground in a heap, Axton started barking out orders. "Kai, take out those two coming out of the trailer," he said. "Jackie, get to the other side of that trailer and see what we're dealing with. I'll take the other side. Meet at the open door." The other two fighters leapt into action like a private taking orders from a superior officer. Kai jogged over and cracked open the skull of the creature on the ground, using his momentum to spin around and crack the one coming down the stairs in the side of the head. As he did that, Jackie rushed around him towards the far edge of the trailer, moving close to it for cover. She peeked out, seeing about a dozen zombies headed towards the highway to her right, their backs to her. She looked to the left and saw about a dozen more creatures spread out pretty far. most of them wandering into the further rows of trailers. Before she wandered back to the meeting point, she noticed 2 zombies on the ground, dead about 30 yards up the road. From her vantage point, they appeared to be in the same condition as the ones shuffling off towards the other trailers. Maybe Zane took them out, she thought, trying to shake it off. But she looked back at the group moving into the neighborhood, like they were tracking something, all shambling in the same direction. Finally, she made herself turn away and go back to the others. Kai stood over his 2 kills, resting the bat on his shoulder, looking around for something else to kill. Axton was there as well, coming around the corner about the same time Jackie got back. "It's not looking too bad on this side of things," he asked. "Straight shot down the line to the houses in the back. Didn't see a single one of those things. What about you?" Jackie hesitated, then swallowed hard. "The boys at the highway are pulling a group towards them," she confirmed. "And there was another group." She paused, not sure if she wanted to bring it up. "That's towards the rear of the neighborhood." Axton cocked a brow. "Something else you want to share?" he asked. "You won't get any judgment from me if you say something wrong. I'd rather you be too cautious than not cautious enough." She nodded slowly. "I saw something weird," she said. "Okay," Axton prompted. "2 of those things were dead in the road, well behind the others," she said. Kai shrugged. "You think 2 dead things is odd?" he asked. "Hell, they could have been there for weeks." She shook her head. "I don't think they were, though," she said. "Why not?" Axton asked. "They looked the same as the group moving away from them," she explained, shaking her head. "Same amount of dirt and grime, similar decomp. And that's not all. The ones that were moving away were moving like they were converging on something." "Could be an animal," Kai suggested. "Or it could be one of Apollo's men," Axton said, voicing Jackie's own concerns. "They were scouting up here the other day when they found Jackie and her friends." "You think they'd come back to the scene of the crime that quickly?" Kai asked. "If what Jackie said was true about how easily Apollo wiped her friends out, I doubt they even see them as a threat at all," Axton said dryly. "So what do we do?" Jackie asked. Axton contemplated for a moment before motioning to the open trailer door. "Let's check in here for guns," he suggested, and immediately raised a hand before she could interrupt him. "I know, we're going to check it out, but if it is Apollo's men, I want to make sure we're ready to handle them." She nodded and followed the 2 men inside the trailer. It was dirty and dingy, the dust from outside coating the entirety of the living room as if the door had been open for days, if not weeks. They recoiled a bit when they came around the corner of the couch, finding a massively overweight corpse laying on the ground, a bottle of pills laying on the stained carpet next to it. Kai towed it with his boot, but it didn't move. "Not the worst way to go these days," Kai murmured as he glanced at the pills. "Given his size, he probably figured he wasn't going to stand much of a chance out there," Jackie said. "Then why the hell was the door open?" Kai asked, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. Axton pointed to a photo on the wall of a hefty man standing beside a teenage boy. "Maybe the kid made a run for it," he suggested. "Regardless, he's not here now, so it doesn't make much of a difference." "I'll check the back bedroom," Kai said. "Watch yourself," Axton reminded him. "More of those things could have wandered in here at some point." Kai nodded, pulling out a knife for close-quarters combat. As he did that, Axton and Jackie walked into the kitchen, which didn't look like it had been disturbed. "Odds on finding anything that's still edible?" she asked. "Given the size of our pill-popping friend out there, I'm not sure edible food has ever set foot in this trailer," Axton drawled. Despite the situation, Jackie chuckled as they looked through the cabinets. Most of the food was gone, presumably taken by the teenager when he left. Jackie made the mistake of opening the fridge, greeted by a god-awful smell, making her slam the door shut. "And I thought he smelled bad," she groaned through a gag. Axton opened up the pantry door, finding half a case of water on the ground. He picked it up and tossed it on the counter. "Well, it's not all bad," he said, peeling apart the bottles and setting them aside. Jackie grabbed one and downed half of it in a single gulp. "Go easy now, girl," he scolded. "We don't have to drink it all right now." "We're going to find more bottles like this, and we aren't carrying it back to town unless we want to break our horse's back," she shot back. "Might as well indulge while we can." Axton shrugged, but was agreeable, grabbing a bottle for himself. As they enjoyed their spoils, Kai entered carrying a hunting rifle and a box of rounds, tossing them onto the counter. "Not much, but it's a start," he said. Axton lifted the gun, checking it over and testing the scope. "The man knew his weaponry," he said. "This scope alone is probably worth more than the trailer we're standing in." $50 ain't all that much," Kai quipped. The group chuckled, and Axton loaded up the gun with ammo and got it ready. "Okay, let's go see what our undead friends outside have their attention focused on," he said, and tossed the gun over to Jackie. She caught it, a bit surprised, as Kai fumed with jealousy. "What you giving it to her for?" he demanded. "Just keeping her at ease," Axton drawled, amusement in his eyes. "You being a big, scary criminal and all." Kai wrinkled his nose, clearly unappreciative of the lack of trust. "Relax," Axton said, waving him off. "She's going to cover us. If it is somebody from the gang, I'd much rather have you by my side in a fight than her." Jackie snorted, cocking a brow in a clear question of, "Are you for real?" "Nothing personal," Axton said, tossing her a smirk. "He got 6 inches and 50 pounds on you. I know you can handle yourself, but he can handle more." She shrugged and nodded, readying the weapon that she had to admit she was grateful for. "I will give you this. You are a brave one," she said. "What makes you say that?" Axton said. "Only 2 types of people would tell the woman with the rifle that she's inferior to a man," she said, as she rested the gun on her shoulder. "A brave person and a moron. And you don't strike me as the latter." Axton barked a laugh, shaking his head as he motioned for them to follow. "Yeah, we'll go with brave," he agreed. "Come on." They left the trailer, and he led them to the edge of the corner, looking up towards the direction of the mob. There were only a couple of stragglers, their legs in bad shape, making their pursuit of the mystery noise incredibly slow. "Well, whatever it is, it still has their attention," he murmured. "Let's take these 2 out and move up." Axton and Kai took point, walking up behind the straggling zombies and swinging hard with their bats, knocking them out of action. They got up to the next row of trailers, looking down the block. About 4 trailers down, they spotted a couple dozen zombies crowded outside of one of the trailers. The door shut and reinforced, given how it hadn't cracked under their weight. Axton looked around, pointing to the trailer they stood beside. "Jackie, think you can get up on the roof there to cover us?" he asked. "Should be a good vantage point." She looked up, seeing it was only about 10 feet off of the ground. She looked over to Kai next as she slung the rifle over her shoulder. "Give me a boost?" she asked. He looked up and nodded, cupping his hands and loosening his knees. In a single motion, he tossed her up as soon as her foot hit his fingers, and she was able to clamber up top. She looked down over the edge. "I'll cover you from here," she said. "If it's just zombies, let us handle it," Axton instructed. "A gunshot is going to attract attention." She nodded. "And if it's bikers?" she asked. "Aim for the biggest guy first," Axton replied. "Or at least the guy with the biggest gun," Kai corrected. "Also a sound idea," Axton said. Jackie nodded and watched the 2 men run off. They moved up behind the row of trailers so they could approach from the rear. The zombies were mostly in front, so they were hoping that the coast was clear around back. Jackie lay prone on the top of the trailer, just waiting for something to happen. She looked through her scope at the trailer, seeing the mob of ghouls outside, all clamoring to get in. Several minutes passed, and nothing. No sound, no action, no nothing other than the faint moans coming from the distance. Out of nowhere, however, muffled gunshots went off, and she startled, scanning the area to look for the source. She caught a muzzle flash going off inside the trailer and aimed her rifle in that direction. It wasn't exactly the best choice for this type of weapon, but the ultra-expensive scope helped out somewhat. She scanned the trailer, looking for another muzzle flash, hoping she could find a target to shoot at. Several more shots went off in rapid succession from inside, from what looked like the living room. A second later, the front door opened and zombies poured in. Jackie didn't panic, even if she was worried about her convict partners. She scanned the windows, looking for a sign from Kai or Axton, but found nothing. As she scanned, smoke began to billow from the front door. "What the hell is going on in there?" she muttered to herself. As she continued to look for a target, glass shattered in the distance, causing her to aim towards the far end of the trailer. She spotted a biker, a small skinny fellow, aiming his handgun back towards the side window. Through the scope, she could see he was bleeding and holding his off hand in a strange position, like it was wounded. He aimed, so she aimed as well, doing her best to track the fleeing biker. She couldn't get a clean look at him as he ran, so she did her best and squeezed the trigger. The bullet missed, hitting the road near his feet, but did get him to look in her direction. He looked up at her as she tried to aim again, but he squeezed off a shot in her direction. While the bullet was way off, instinctively she ducked down, allowing him to get to cover. She knew that she needed to get him. If he'd been having a firefight with Kai and Axton, then he wasn't a friendly. And if he could get to his friends, then this mission was over before it had begun. She picked up her rifle, running to the edge of the trailer and grabbing onto the edge before dropping down. She landed hard on the ground, falling over before quickly picking herself up and sprinting in the biker's direction. She didn't have eyes on him, just a general idea of the direction he was going. As she ran down the yards between two sets of trailers, about 15 yards between structures, she saw the biker dart across the way, about 3 trailers up. Rather than continue a direct pursuit, she made a turn at the next trailer, cutting back towards the highway, thinking that if he was this far up, then his bike must have been close to the road. As she reached the next row, which was about 3 before the road, several zombies came around the corner to her right. They appeared to be just as surprised by her presence as she was of theirs. Jackie didn't slow down or engage with them. Rather, she adjusted course around them, narrowly avoiding being grabbed by their outstretched hands. As she came around the corner of the next trailer, a shot rang out, the bullet impacting the side of the trailer and forcing her back behind cover. She glanced around the corner, seeing that the biker was laying in wait for her, 2 rows down. Thankfully, it was a long enough shot that he wasn't able to get a perfect angle, causing him to miss. She reached for her rifle, but stopped when she saw him running off. She continued her pursuit, glancing back at the 6 zombies coming in her direction, with more presumably on the way after that gunshot. She made it to the next row of trailers, pausing to make sure he wasn't going to take another cheap shot at her. And he wasn't. She saw his foot vanish behind the next trailer, letting her know he was making a run for it. She did the same, sprinting as hard as she could towards the highway, hoping to catch up to him there. As she made it to the final trailer, a motorcycle engine kick started not too far away. As she ran, she pulled off the rifle, readying it to fire. Jackie made it to the edge of the next trailer, aiming the rifle down the highway towards the noise. But she couldn't get a clear shot due to the 12 zombies in between them. She looked over towards the road, finding one of the cars they'd pushed off resting at the side. She looked back towards the biker, who was getting ready to ride off, and she made her move. She ran to the car, leaping up onto the hood and taking a knee, aiming the rifle towards the biker who had now made it to the highway. Before he could kick it into high gear and motor off, she aimed and squeezed the trigger. Unlike her first shot, This one was right on target. A straight shot towards the bike, the bullet ripping into the back tire. He quickly lost control, slamming into the back of a sedan. The impact was brutal, sending the biker tumbling headfirst over the handlebars, landing hard on the pavement. Jackie was proud of the shot she made, letting out a celebratory whoop. However, it quickly faded when she saw the dozen or so zombies all moving towards him. The closest being about 15 yards away, and closing. The biker not really moving all that fast. "Damn it," she muttered, and looked back towards the decoy trio, who were standing on cars about 40 yards back and smacking down zombies. She let out a loud whistle to get their attention, waving for help before she sprinted off towards the downed biker. She slung the rifle over her shoulder as she picked up a head of steam on the highway. She looked straight ahead at the man laying face down on the road, struggling to get back up onto his feet. His lack of a helmet had left his face in a pretty bloody state. To their left were the zombies that were marching towards him, getting closer and closer. Jackie pulled out her knife as she ran, getting around the final car on the road before reaching him, a lone zombie between them with its back to her. Jackie rushed forward, jamming the knife into its skull and pulling it back out in a single motion as she made it to her opponent. He tried to lift his gun up once he realized it was her, but she was quick to kick it away, the gun sliding under a nearby sedan. "Stop fighting! I'm here to help," she snapped. The biker looked behind her at the slow-moving mob of death headed towards him. He nodded half-heartedly as she picked him up off of the ground, slinging one of his arms over her shoulder and pulling him towards a nearby car. She opened up the back door, shoving him inside, before hopping into the front seat, slamming the door shut just before the ghouls reached the vehicle. She fiddled around with the controls on the armrest, finally locking the vehicle down. The two of them sat in silence for several moments, watching in horror as the zombies slowly surrounded them, rotting faces pressed up against the glass, decrepit hands spreading dark blood across the windows. "Not sure if I should say thanks, or go to hell," the biker huffed. "Well, you are alive because of me, so should be an easy choice," she snapped. His gaze darkened. "Yeah, but I also face-planted on the pavement because of you too," he growled. "So it's kind of a toss-up." "Fair enough," she agreed with a shrug. He sighed heavily before asking, "What's your name?" "Jackie," she replied, cocking her head. "You?" "They call me Mac," he replied. "Pleasure," she quipped. "So, Jackie," Mac groaned as he sat up straight. "Don't suppose you know how we're getting out of this, do you?" She smirked. "Lucky for you, I'm not alone," she said, and looked through the mob of ghouls pressed against the window. The group of prisoners cracked skulls from the back of the pack, and she pointed towards them. Mac leaned forward and squinted to take notice, and though he didn't visibly react at the sight of Axton, the fact that he didn't say a word and simply slumped in his seat spoke volumes. They watched from inside the car as the convicts laid waste to the mob of undead. Finally, the coast was clear, and Jackie unlocked the door. She opened it up first, and Axton was there to greet her. "Are you okay?" he asked, brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, just fine," Jackie replied with a smile. "What in the world were you doing?" he demanded. "Levi said you waved them down, then ran into a mob." She pointed into the back seat with a smirk. "He shot at you, so I figured you'd want to have a word with him," she said. Axton leaned down and peered into the back seat, a smile growing on his face. "Hey there, Mac," he drawled. "Long time. Jackie's right. We should have a word." Chapter 3. Kai and Arthur dragged Mac through the streets, the rest of them walking behind. Everybody was silent. The only sounds were the handful of moans coming from the neighborhood. A black cloud of smoke billowed up in the distance from the back of the area. "Carter, Levi, go take care of them," Axton said. "Most of them should have been burned up, but I don't want any surprises." "You want us to start searching through the trailers?" Carter asked. Axton nodded. "Might as well," he replied. "I think we got it under control here." The two men nodded and headed off into the neighborhood on cleanup duty. The restaurant was just up ahead, the door open with nobody inside. "What are you going to do with him?" Jackie asked. "Haven't decided yet," he replied, crossing his arms. She regarded him as she asked, "How well do you know him?" "Rode together for a few years now," Axton replied. "Not close, but not adversaries, at least until today." She picked up the hint of anger under his breath. "So he shot at you?" she asked. "You telling me you didn't hear the gunshots while you were perched up on that trailer?" he asked, venom in his tone. She nodded calmly, not letting his ire get to her. "Yes, I heard shots, but that wasn't my question," she said. "Was he shooting at you?" She made sure to emphasize the word, driving the point home to Axton, who stood there and seemed to replay the entire encounter in his head. He thought for several moments before shaking his head. "Maybe he did see Kai first," he admitted. She nodded. "Okay then," she said. "So now, what are you going to do with him?" "I'm getting the sense you don't want me to put this man in the ground, Jackie," he said, raising an eyebrow. "If he needs to be put in the ground, so be it," she said, raising her palms. "But if him staying topside benefits us, I'd rather that happen." Axton nodded in agreement, calmer than before, which relaxed her touch. "Well, let's go see if he can benefit us then," he said, and led her into the restaurant. Mac stood in the middle of the room, and Kai and Arthur stood off to the side, both of them holding weapons. Mac was tense, pacing back and forth, and perked up when Axton entered. "First off, I swear I didn't know it was you I was shooting at," he gushed. Axton held up a hand to calm him down. "I understand. It's okay," he said. "Bullshit, it's okay," Kai argued. "Beat what you need out of him. Put one in the back of his skull and let's call it a day." "Did I miss the memo where you were in charge of this situation?" Axton snapped, glaring at him until he backed down with a huff. "That's what I thought. Now, Mac, I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you shot at my friend Kai here because, well, let's be honest, he looks like the type of person that needs to be shot at." "It was nothing personal," Mac agreed, nodding like a bobblehead. "I saw your weapon and—" "Bygones, my friend, bygones," Axton cut in. "Everybody's fine, nobody got shot, and we're all still standing." His tone turned deadly serious. "For the moment." Mac swallowed hard, staring at him with wide eyes. "Axton, you know I've always been loyal to you," he pleaded. "I would never, ever do anything to harm you." "We'll see," Axton said. "Why don't you start by telling me what you're doing up here all by yourself?" "After Apollo had that fight with the people from Dalhart, he wanted to make sure we had this neighborhood gutted of anything useful," Mac explained, the words coming fast. "Just in case they decided to make a play for it." "And did you find anything?" Axton asked. Mac nodded. "Handful of guns and ammo," he replied. "I stashed it in the trailer by where my bike was." Axton tilted his head at Kai. "Go check it out," he said. "Me?" Kai snapped. "Yeah, unless you want to keep lounging around the restaurant here," Axton drawled. "We're on the clock here." Kai pushed off from the wall and begrudgingly wandered off. "So, let's assume you're telling the truth about that, because I think I know you well enough to know you're not stupid enough to lie to me." He gave a frightening grin that had Mac withering beneath his gaze. "So, with that out of the way, what else can you tell me about Apollo?" Mac gulped again. "Well," he stammered, "what do you want to know?" "What do you think would be relevant in our current situation?" Axton asked. "Maybe, where's he at? What's he planning? Come on, Mac. I just said you weren't stupid, so don't make a liar out of me." I don't know what he's planning," Mac admitted. "I just know he sent me up here and sent some scouts to downtown Dumas." Axton's brow furrowed. "Downtown Dumas?" he asked. "I thought that was crawling with zombies." "It is, but he wants something there," Mac said with a shrug. "I don't know what." Axton glanced at Jackie. "Do you have any idea?" he asked. Her heart thundered in her ears, screaming in panic on the inside. But she kept her face as calm as she could. "I don't know," she said. "Okay, that's helpful, I think," Axton said. "So, where is he at?" "We are holed up at this farmhouse just to the east of town," Mac explained. "Maybe 2 miles outside, straight up the main road, out of town, first driveway with the street light over it." Axton paced around the room, not saying a word, which put Mac in a bit of a panic, and he started babbling. "Oh, come on. I don't know what you're thinking, but you don't have to do anything to me," he pleaded. "I swear, I'm on your side." "You're right. You don't know what I'm thinking," Axton said, whirling and getting in his face. "But you do bring up an interesting point that needs to be shined upon. You're on my side, but how many others in the gang are as enlightened as you?" Mac tilted his head back and forth. "Honestly?" "Given your current predicament, it damn well better be honest," Axton warned. Mac held up his hands. Yeah, wrong word. Really, Axton. Most of us are still loyal to you," he stammered. "When old Zeke led that charge into Dalhart to go get you, we had an army. We got hit hard, though, and most of us have just been grinning and bearing it under Apollo." "So, you're telling me, if I go to the farmhouse and deal with Apollo, everybody's going to fall in line?" Axton asked. Mac grimaced. "Maybe not everybody, but definitely most of them," he said. Axton walked over to the counter, looking beside the register and grabbing a pen and order pad. He tossed it over to Mac, who looked confused. "You give me the name of everybody you know is loyal to Apollo still," Axton instructed. "You can leave off the regulars. Just give me the ones who may have had a change of heart in my absence." Mac nodded and started scribbling as Kai came back in, carrying a duffel bag full of guns. "He wasn't lying," the ex-prisoner announced. "We're armed to the teeth now." He tossed the bag on a table and they opened it up, finding rifles, shotguns, and handguns. As they admired their haul, Mac cleared his throat to get their attention, holding out the notepad. "That's everybody I can think of, even people who are on the fence about you," he said. "The star is who is on the fence." He pointed to the little stars he'd drawn next to some of the names. "Okay, this is good information to have," Axton said with a nod. Mac hesitated. "So, you're going to let me go then?" he asked hopefully. Axton barked a laugh, startling him. "Afraid I can't do that," he said. "However, I am going to let you live, so consolation prize." "What do you want to do with him?" Arthur asked. Axton walked over to the back of the restaurant, finding a walk-in storage room that was filled with food. He grabbed some stuff from it, setting the supplies on the counter. "Toss him in there," he instructed. Arthur grabbed Mac by the collar and shoved him in the room. Axton slammed the door shut behind him, locking it from the outside. "Now, you get settled in there," he drawled. "I'll let you know when it's supper time." Mac didn't make a sound, simply stared through the window, gratefulness on his face to be alive. "Will one of you boys go find the others and tell them they can call off their search?" Axton asked. "It would appear as though Mac did the heavy lifting for us." Kai nodded and headed off, leaving Jackie and Arthur in the kitchen. "So, how do you want to play it?" Arthur asked. "You want to hit them tonight?" Jackie cocked her head. "That's not a bad idea," she added. "If Mac doesn't show back up, they might start to suspect something." Axton grinned. "Well, if I know my brothers and sisters, they're not going to be missing him until they sober up tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Now, we rest up, let them get wasted and hung over. A good meal and another good night's rest will give us the edge." Jackie looked at him, watching the scenarios run through his head. She wasn't sure what he was thinking about, only that it seemed he was really looking forward to it. Chapter 4. Everybody sat around the restaurant, silently eating their dinner. A stew made from various canned goods they'd found in the storage area. The silence was broken by some banging on the storage door. "Any chance I can get a little more?" Mac asked. "And maybe a bathroom break before everybody settles in?" Levi nodded. "Yeah, I got it," he said, and got up to go get Mac a refill and some relief. The rest of the group continued their meal, except for Jackie, who finished up and hissed as her spoon brushed up against her missing finger wound. "You okay over there?" Axton asked, cocking a brow. She dropped the spoon and shook her hand out. "Yeah, just still getting used to missing a digit," she said. "Can't say that I can relate, but I can say that I'll make sure Apollo gets what's coming to him," Axton said. She smiled softly. "I can live with that," she said. "So, you have any idea how we're going to get to him tomorrow?" "I'm just going to be my usual bold self. Walk up to the front door and ask for him," Axton declared. She blinked. "And what happens if that doesn't work?" she asked dryly. "Well, if that doesn't work, I'll most likely be dead, and won't really care what the plan going forward is," he replied with a smirk. Jackie sighed. "Not the most uplifting backup plan there," she said. "You sure walking up to the front door is the way to go?" "If you stop and think about it, doing it this way is the only viable option," Axton explained. "We have to assume Mac is telling the truth about the state of the gang, and that there's still significant support for me within the ranks. If we go in there guns a-blazing and take down a couple of my supporters, then bam!" He snapped his fingers for effect. "All of that goodwill and support vanishes. However, if we play it out my way, just walk in through the front door, my supporters will hold Apollo's at bay since they outnumber him." She nodded slowly. "And then what?" she asked. Axton shrugged. "Guess Apollo and I will settle our differences the way men have been settling them for centuries," he said. "A good old-fashioned beatdown." "You sure you can take him?" she asked, cocking a brow. "He's a big dude." He huffed, feigning offense. "Hey now, I'm no slouch," he huffed. "I can handle myself. Plus, I owe him a little something extra." "Oh yeah?" she asked, curiosity piqued. "What for?" A sly grin overtook his face. "In due time, Jackie. In due time," he said. "All right, Mac is taken care of, locked up tight," Levi announced as he entered the room. "Thanks," Axton said, and got up, walking over to the front window and looking out at the landscape as the sun went down. The sky was painted with reds and oranges for a beautiful evening show. The moment was fleeting, as the colors quickly faded, and he turned back to the group as they finished up their meals. "Okay, we're leaving at dawn," he said firmly. "No sleeping in this time, so finish up your food and get settled in. Tomorrow's going to be a hell of a day." Chapter 5. Day 0 plus 45. Jackie laid half asleep on the makeshift bunk on the floor of the restaurant. She had been dreaming a pleasant dream of being on stage and rocking out in front of a legion of fans. She was jolted out of it by the sound of banging. At first she thought that Mac needed something, but that guess was quickly tossed aside as glass shattered just a few yards away from her. She looked over at a dozen zombies pressed up against what used to be the front window of the restaurant. The cheap glass and even cheaper wood frame supporting it crashed down around Levi, who lay on the ground beneath it. He leapt awake violently by the commotion and the glass, screaming as he looked up at the gaping, rotted maws of the hungry mob. As they reached for him, Jackie lunged from her cot, grabbing a heavy chair from one of the tables and rushing towards the ghouls. She braced the top of the chair in her gut for extra support, aiming the legs at the center of the mass right above him. A couple of the ghouls reached down and grabbed him, one on his arm and one on his leg, and he struggled to break free as they tried to pull him towards their mouths. Jackie shoved the chair into them with enough force to send them lurching backwards, breaking their grip on him. He scrambled away, crawling on the floor. "Jackie, get out of the way!" Axton bellowed, and she glanced over her shoulder at the men all standing upright holding guns. She didn't think, just reacted, shoving the chair forward and diving off to the side. As she hit the ground and covered her head, the restaurant filled with the deafening sounds of gunshots. 20, 30 rounds fired off in rapid succession, and she didn't look up, just keeping her head buried for safety. "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" Axton finally cried, and the gunshots fell silent. Then he was next to Jackie, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, I think so." She cocked her head. "Is Levi?" "I'm fine, thanks to you," he replied with a sharp nod. "Where the hell did those things come from?" "Gotta be the highway," Carter said. "Just a batch wandering up, here's somebody snoring, and next thing you know, we're on the buffet menu." "Kai, Arthur, go check the road," Axton barked. "Make sure we have time to pack up." The two men nodded, checking their weapons and grabbing bats as they rushed out of the restaurant. Axton approached the bag of weapons, rifling through it before finding a hatchet and pulling it out, walking back to the rear of the restaurant. He opened up the wooden storage room door. "Hey, Mac, get up," he said, flicking on the light. The biker was already upright and bright-eyed, likely from all the shooting. "What's going on out there?" he asked. "We had a little undead company, so we're going to be taking off a little earlier than expected," Axton explained. "Well, you have my word that I'm going to stay put here," Mac said firmly. "While that is comforting, until I know with 100% certainty that I can trust you, I'm going to have to take some precautions," Axton replied. Mac's eyes widened as he stared at the shiny silver hatchet in his boss's hand. "Come on, Axton. Don't do anything crazy now," he babbled. Axton was confused for a split second, before realizing what he'd implied by holding the weapon. "Oh, you worry too much," he said, laughing. "I'm not going to hack off a limb or anything." He knocked on the wooden door. "I'm just going to lock you in here while we take off." Mac's eyes widened. "You're going to lock me in here?" he cried. "For how long?" "Well, judging by the door, maybe an hour or so," Axton said, holding up the hatchet. "Should be able to hack through the wood in that time to reach out and unlock it. We'll be well on our way by then, and since your bike is busted out, you won't be able to catch up. Figured this was the best way to go with it." Mac eyed him suspiciously, unconvinced that this was a good plan at all. Axton wiggled the weapon. "I mean, I could always go with the limb hacking," he said. No, Mac gushed, holding up his palms. "A little wood chopping will be just fine. In fact, once I'm out, I'll even stay here until tomorrow before trying to head back down to the farm." Axton nodded in approval. "You do that," he said. "And if what you say is true about my supporters, then you'll officially be in my good graces." Mac nodded. "Be safe," he said. Axton grinned and set the hatchet on one of the shelves with the food on it, before heading out and shutting and locking the door. "You sure that hatchet can get through the door?" Jackie asked from the hallway. Axton shrugged. "If not, he has more than enough food to last him until I can send someone to retrieve him," he said. "Fair enough," she agreed. The two of them headed back into the restaurant where Kai and Arthur were just coming back inside. "Looks like we're in the clear," the latter said. "At least within a half-mile or so." "Horses are still in good shape, too," Kai added. "Good. Let's get packed up and head out. We got a lot of ground to cover today," Axton said. Everybody grabbed their gear and headed outside, the sun just beginning to peek up over the horizon. They loaded up the horses and hopped on, following Axton as he led them down a small patch about a quarter-mile off of the road, running parallel with it. The ride was a brisk one, with them moving at a solid gallop, covering ground quickly, They got a couple miles down the road before they looked over at a solid mass of ghouls beginning to appear on the road. Cars were strewn about, some wrecked, but most off of the road. There were a few random bodies in the road, some crushed, with a select few still moving, too broken to get up and move, but still alive and thrashing about. 45 minutes into their ride, they slowed to a walk, and Axton directed them further away from the highway, moving another quarter-mile off of it, not wanting to risk attracting all that attention. They strolled up a small hill that overlooked the downtown area of Dumas, stopping at the crest. Axton handed the reins of his horse over to Levi, Jackie, and Kai, following suit. The trio walked over to the edge, taking a knee and looking down at the city. They blinked in shock at the sight. 1,000 zombies were jam-packed into the small town, filling every street and completely covering the main highway, cutting through downtown.
"Kai, if you would be so kind, get my binoculars for me,"
Axton finally said. Kai dug around in the travel bag and grabbed the pair of binoculars, handing them over. Axton looked through them, slowly panning over every inch of downtown.
"How's it looking down there?"
Kai asked, when he couldn't take the wait any longer.
"It's one hell of a block party, that's for sure,"
Axton muttered.
"Main road is completely impassable. The side roads look manageable if you were so inclined, although I don't recommend it."
"Sorry, Jackie. Looks like you'll have to go shopping some other time," Kai joked. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, a woman shopping joke," she drawled. "You must be such a hit with the ladies." He huffed and walked off, back to his horse as Axton continued to scan the area. He focused on a parked car outside of a store, a block off of the main highway, staying on it for a good long while. He recognized it as the Connor's vehicle. Jackie took note, watching as he fought the urge to smile big, his lip curling into a sly smile, as if he were in on something nobody else was. "See anything good?" she asked, and watched his expression snap back into his poker face. She knew this was a dangerous game now.
"Nothing worth the amount of trouble it would take to get to it,"
he said, lowering the binoculars.
"Maybe if that Amarillo mob clears them out a bit."
"So only kinda good?" Jackie asked.
"Just a good liquor store," he said with a wink. "Doesn't look like it has been hit yet."
She forced a grin. "Well, put me down for a bottle of top-shelf whiskey, if you don't mind," she said.
"With everything you're doing for us, I'll put you down for 2,
Axton replied. "After saving my ass, you can have one of my bottles too," Levi called from the horses. "All right. Now all we have to do is overthrow Apollo and wait for 1,000 of those things to get bored and wander off before I can get loaded on the good stuff," she joked as she headed back for her horse. "Something to look forward to, at least," Levi said as he handed back the reins. The group continued out of town, following the directions that Mac had provided them. They rode for another hour, way out into the boonies, surrounded by vast fields of nothingness, interrupted by the occasional small farm. Axton stopped unexpectedly, and Kai had to jerk on his reins to avoid smacking into him. "What are you doing?" he hissed.
"Just hang on a second,"
Axton said, pulling out his binoculars and looking up the road. There was a street light over a driveway, with a couple of people sitting in folding chairs by the entrance. A few four-wheelers parked off to the side.
"Found them,"
he said. "Great. Can we go get them now?" Kai huffed impatiently. Axton held out the binoculars to him.
"They have 2 guards. Can't tell who they are from here," he said, looking out over the area across from them at some plant growth about 50 yards off of the road. "Let's stash the horses and walk. I want everybody over there, weapons ready in case this doesn't work."
"In case what doesn't work?" Carter asked. Axton just grinned, but didn't answer, and Levi chuckled, shaking his head. "You heard the man," he said. "Let's get into position." They stashed the horses off of the road, tied to a fence. Everybody geared up with their weapons, except for Axton, who just had a knife at his side and no gun. He waited on the road for several minutes, watching until his companions got into position. Once they were hidden, he began strolling up the middle of the road like he owned the entire county. When he got closer, finally the two guards leapt from their seats, both of them holding weapons. "Don't know where you're coming from, but if you know what's good for you, then you'll head right back to it," the first one bellowed, and Axton recognized him as Dax. He was still 50 yards away, walking casually, completely ignoring their instructions. The other one cocked his gun loudly. "You take one more step, asshole, and I'm going to blow your head clean off," he yelled, and Axton placed Killian's voice as well as his face as he continued to stride towards them. Both bikers looked at each other and raised their weapons. Axton put his hands in the air, speaking loud and with authority. "Now, is that any way to treat your leader?" he called. Both men lowered their guns as he came close enough for them to get a better view of him. "Axton?" Dax breathed. "Is that you?" "In the flesh. The one and only," Axton replied with a grin. "Or were you expecting someone else?" "Shit, man. We weren't expecting you at all," Dax cried. "I thought they had you locked up tight over there in Dalhart." "You should know by now that there isn't a prison on this planet that can hold me," Axton replied, shrugging. "Although I will admit that it was a little easier to break out once all the guards were dead." Dax lowered his gun completely and rushed forward to give his leader a bro hug. "Brother, it is good to see you," he said, clenching his arm tight. "Man, you gotta know, a big group of us tried to get to you when this all started. We just didn't have the firepower to get it done." His voice was clearly full of sincerity, rather than fear of reprisal, and Axton smiled wanly, clapping him on the back. "I heard all about it," he said. "Heard about old Zeke, too." "That crazy bastard was hell-bent on getting you out," Dax said, stepping back and shaking his head. "Just wish we could have pulled it off." "Well, the point is you tried," Axton said, "and that's good enough in my book." Still gripping Dax's shoulder affectionately, he turned to Killian, who still had his weapon half raised. "Well, is that a shotgun in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" Dax's eyes widened when he realized his companion hadn't moved. "Man, put that down," he hissed. Killian relented, lowering his gun as his face widened into the fakest smile Axton had ever seen. "Never thought I'd see the day when you'd be standing in front of me," he drawled. "Thought those bastards in Dalhart would have put you down, or at the very least locked you up and thrown away the key." "Don't think they didn't try," Axton replied easily. "But like I said, no prison." Yeah, no prison can hold you," Killian cut in, waving a flippant hand. "So you telling me that you broke out all on your own?" Axton rolled his eyes. "Well, no need to be a buzzkill, but to answer your question, no, I did not break out on my own," he said. "You know damn well that I'm a leader of men, and I rallied some troops to my cause." He let out a loud two-finger whistle and waved to the group in hiding. Killian stiffened as the group stood up and started marching in their direction. "You can relax," Axton said. "They're friendly." Killian grunted and lowered his weapon a bit as the three of them lined up shoulder to shoulder, Axton in the middle. They watched as the group walked up to them, stopping on the other side of the road. "Levi, is that you?" Dax gasped. "Been a long time," Levi replied with a grin. "Good to see you, brother." "You too," Dax said, and they embraced in another back-clapping bro hug. A split second later, Axton drew his knife, driving it deep into Killian's gut. He knocked the shotgun away before he could fire it and grabbed his old comrade by the hair. He didn't speak as he wrenched the knife up into the man's internal organs to make sure the death was quick. Everyone but Dax reacted with shock and awe, especially Jackie, whose hands had found their way to her cheeks at the sudden violent carnage. "What the hell was that?" Kai cried. "You just gutted that guy like a fish." Jackie shook her head slowly. "I hate to agree with Kai, but hard agree. What the hell was that?" she echoed. Axton put his hand on Killian's face, shoving the corpse to the ground, hand and blade covered in blood. He reached into his pocket with his clean hand, pulling out a piece of paper and handing it over to Jackie. He pulled a rag from Killian's back pocket to clean himself up.
"Levi, if you would be so kind, please introduce our bleeding friend to the group," he said, voice animated and bright.
"This, my good people, is Killian," Levi said, just as jovial.
"And Jackie," Axton continued, "if you would be so kind as to read off the name at the top of Mac's unfriendly list."
She unfolded the paper and nodded. "Killian," she said.
"Ding, ding, ding, we have a winner,"
Axton declared as he finished cleaning his blade.
"Not only was Killian here one of Apollo's top men, but he also rejoined the gang 6 months ago after spending 3 years in prison for rape. Normally, I would have cut his boys off and fed them to him, but Apollo made that impossible. Believe me when I say this man will not be missed by anyone, anywhere."
He tossed the bloody rag over Killian's dead eyes. "He's right. Dude was scum of the earth," Dax agreed.
"And what about you?"
Kai demanded, jutting out his chin. "You have any reason why we shouldn't do that to you too?" Dax flipped his gun around, offering it to Kai grip first. "I trust Axton, and if he trusts you, then I trust you too," he said. "I can show you where Apollo is if you want. Get some of the others to help round up his inner circle. With any luck, we can prevent an all-out war." Kai glanced over to Axton, who nodded, vouching for his man. Kai pushed the gun back to Dax, muttering under his breath to keep it. "So, this is your show. How do you want to play it?" Dax asked, excitement dancing in his eyes.
"Levi, Carter, Jackie, go with Dax and see who you can round up," Axton said. "Try your best to keep things quiet, but do what you gotta do. Kai, Arthur, I want you with me. If I know Apollo, wherever he is, he's going to have some muscle around him. Hope you're ready for a fight."
Dax cocked his head. "He's in the big house, master bedroom on the 2nd floor," he said. "At least, that's where he was headed last night before I came out here for my shift." "It's getting close to noon. You think he's still there?" Jackie asked. Dax shrugged. "We cleared out a liquor store in Stinnett a week or so ago," he said. "Even with the way this crew drinks, it's going to last us a while. If he isn't dead from alcohol poisoning, then Apollo will be crashed out there." Axton nodded.
"Okay, let's move," he instructed.
The group broke up into their teams and started moving down the driveway, leaving the four-wheelers behind. With as much partying as had been going on the night before, making loud noises would attract unwanted attention. The driveway was long and winding, about half a mile long. They walked in silence, everybody prepping for their various battles. Finally, they got to the end of the driveway, which opened up into a big area. To their left was an open barn area where most of the low-level bikers were passed out, some on the ground in front of it, and a couple in hay bales off to the side. To the right was the farmhouse, which had 2 armed guards walking outside on the porch.
"Guess everybody didn't party last night,"
Axton muttered. "Apollo knows he isn't popular with everybody in the gang," Dax explained, "so he doesn't take chances. A good bet there's more on the inside, too."
"Thanks for the heads up," Axton said with a nod. "Go rally our people. We'll take care of it from here."
He and Jackie shared a firm nod, eyes locking for a moment in a clear message of, "Be safe." Axton led Kai and Arthur to the corner to survey the area as the others headed off to the other side of the barn. There was a pickup truck halfway between them and the house. They waited until the guards weren't in view before rushing up to take cover behind it, pushing them within striking distance, and took a knee.
"I want you two to take them out quietly,"
Axton said softly.
"Spare them if you can, but don't put yourself in any undue danger."
Both men nodded and peeked over the top of the truck. The 2 guards were about to pass each other on the porch, which wrapped completely around the house. They were walking in opposite directions, passing each other at the front and back entrances. When they vanished around the sides of the house, Axton gave them the signal, The three of them darted out from behind cover, rushing towards the porch, quietly getting onto it. Axton motioned for them to go in opposite directions to sneak up on them. Kai moved first, coming around the left side of the house, looking down the long porch. His target was about 15 yards away. He came out from behind cover, moving swiftly but quietly as he could. When he made it within 5 yards of the guard, he lunged forward, driving the knife into the man's back while covering his scream with his offhand. "Shh, shh, shh," Kai whispered. "Just let go. Just let go." He gently laid the man on the ground before cleaning off his blade and continuing to the back of the house. He looked around the corner and found a couple of biker guards sitting on the stoop, drinking beer and talking. His initial instinct was to take them out, but he knew Axton wouldn't take kindly to that, so he waited. Arthur, on the other hand, didn't have as easy a time with his guard, sneaking up behind him, however. When he made it within 5 yards, he stepped a little too hard, alerting the guard to his presence. The biker turned and began to raise his weapon, prompting Arthur to rush forward, barely getting his hands on the weapon before it was properly aimed. The biker squeezed the trigger in the struggle, sending a round onto the porch. Arthur viciously headbutted his opponent, stunning him and causing him to drop the gun. He didn't waste his opportunity, punching him several times in the face, bloodying his nose and sending him staggering backwards. Arthur paused his barrage of fists long enough to see how well the man was doing before delivering the knockout blow. As he hit the ground, Arthur picked up his gun and pocketed it, only to hear a struggle on the back porch. He ran around the corner, finding two bikers in a knife fight with Kai. Everybody was getting in some blows, his companion already bleeding from several cuts on his hands while breaking a nose and cracking a couple of ribs. Rather than enter the fray, Arthur cocked the hammer back on his handgun, the sound halting the fighting. "Why don't you boys have a seat?" Kai grinned through the blood in his mouth, embracing his inner psycho. He spit a glob of crimson spit in their direction, nodding to them. "Yeah, you'd better sit down." "You want to guard them, or you want to help Axton?" Arthur asked. "Axton's back?" One of the bikers piped up, eyes wide. Arthur and Kai shared a look and shrugged. "Yeah, he's going after Apollo," Arthur said. The biker opened his mouth, urgency in his tone. "You need to go help him, now," he said. Kai spit out another glob of blood before turning and kicking the back door of the house in. As soon as the wood left the hinges, gunfire peppered the doorframe, and he dove behind a cabinet for cover. Arthur leaned across the threshold of the door and popped off a few rounds, which gave Kai time to scramble to his feet. He sprinted off through the kitchen, finding the dining room where the shots had come from. As he reached the door, the gunman came around to fire another shot, but cried out in shock at how quickly Kai had reached him. The ex-prisoner swung his arm up, catching the biker on the forearm and sending the gun skyward, popping off a shot into the ceiling. Kai didn't let up, delivering several vicious blows to the head and causing him to drop the handgun. The large biker was stunned but able to shove Kai back enough to break free and regain his composure. "Let's have some fun, boy," the biker said with a smirk, stepping forward and swinging hard. But Kai ducked under it. He swung upward, catching the biker in the ribs, the faint sound of cracking as the biker winced in pain. He retaliated by lunging forward and grabbing Kai by the shirt and flinging him across the dining room table, which was filled with beer bottles from the night before. Glass crashed down to the ground, shattering. Kai landed hard on the ground and on top of some glass. As he caught his bearings, he grabbed a pile of glass in his bare hand, waiting as the biker marched towards him. "I don't know who you are," his opponent warned, "but I'm going to enjoy making you clean up that glass with your tongue." As he reached down to grab Kai's shirt to pull him up, the prisoner flipped over and threw a handful of shards into the biker's eyes. He screamed, stumbling backwards and flailing about in his newfound blindness. Kai leapt to his feet, grabbing a still intact beer bottle and rushing the biker, timing his shot perfectly to crack him in the side of the head, stunning him. He flipped the bottle over and stabbed him in the head with the blunt bottom edge, cracking both the glass and his skull, and sending him to the ground. Kai knelt down, continuing to smack the biker on the head with the bottle until it completely shattered and carved up his opponent's face. After a couple dozen frantic stabs, the biker lay motionless, and Kai was left to sit there, breathing heavily. Finally, he forced himself to get up, dropping the broken bottle and wiping the blood from his hands. "Okay, gotta find Axton," he muttered. A second later, footsteps came from above him, followed by a scream. He looked ahead towards the front room, where a biker landed face first on the floor with a thud. He was moving slightly, so it didn't kill him, but likely made him wish he were dead. Kai walked over to him, looking down and seeing that it wasn't Axton. The biker tried to react, but Kai kicked him in the head, knocking him out. He heard more struggles upstairs and ran over to the staircase heading up to the second floor. When he reached the hallway, there was a commotion coming from the back bedroom, and he pulled out his gun and moved. Screams and furniture smashing sounds came through the shut door, and he threw it open, raising his gun. Two bikers lay in a heap on the floor, all the furniture in the room busted. The only two men left standing were Axton and Apollo, both of whom held handguns pointed at each other. Kai aimed at Apollo. "Sorry I took so long," he huffed.
"Oh, don't you worry about it,"
Axton said brightly.
"I have things well under control."
"Under control?"
Apollo barked.
"You have a gun pointed at you."
"And you have two pointed right back at you,"
Axton said. Apollo sneered.
"You try anything, and you're the first to get put down,"
he said.
"He may get me, but you won't."
"Well, it would appear as though we have ourselves a bit of a standoff,"
Axton said.
"For now,"
Apollo drawled, baring his teeth.
"By the end of this, you're both gonna wish I put you down. We don't show mercy to those who betray us."
Axton growled.
"Betray you?"
he demanded.
"I'm just here to reclaim what is rightfully mine, what I built from the ground up."
"And what I turned into a regional powerhouse once society crumbled to the ground,"
Apollo said, raising his chin.
"Yeah, one whole farmhouse,"
Kai said, rolling his eyes.
"You hit the big time here."
Axton cocked his head.
"I'm afraid I have to agree with my friend here,"
he said.
"You don't look like you've done much of anything except get wasted night after night."
"I'd say go ask people in Stinnett, Borgia, or even all the way down to Pampa what we've done,"
Apollo said.
"But anybody who opposed us is no longer there."
"So, you kicked some desperate people out of their homes,"
Kai shot back.
"Bra-fucking-vo."
Apollo smirked.
"Oh, we didn't kick them out. We had some fun with them first,"
he drawled. Muffled sounds of chatter came from outside the building, and Apollo's smirk widened into a grin.
"And from the sounds of it, we're about to have some fun with you too," he said.
"Apollo! Axton!" Dax bellowed from outside. "Respond if you can hear me!"
"Yeah, we're upstairs,"
Apollo called back.
"I got him right where I want him."
"Axton?"
Dax yelled.
"Right here too, brother,"
Axton called through the broken window. "Both of you down here now," Dax said. "We have things to discuss." Both men glared at each other, neither one wanting to drop their gun first.
"Same time?"
Axton suggested. Apollo nodded, but glanced at Kai before moving his hand.
"Kai, unless you want to stand here all day, why don't you go ahead and lower your gun?"
Axton said. Kai nodded jerkily and begrudgingly complied. Axton waved him off and he descended the stairs, both men not lowering their weapons until he was out of sight. Once lowered, they approached the door, and Apollo motioned for his predecessor to go first.
"You're too kind, but I insist,"
Apollo replied with a flourish.
"And let your man jump me?"
Apollo snapped, shaking his head.
"Get a move on."
Axton shrugged and walked backwards down the hallway, keeping a close eye on his usurper. Finally, they made it downstairs and out the front door, where the entire gang waited, standing in a semicircle around the front of the house, with Dax and the others from Axton's group flanking them. Axton and Apollo made it outside, standing in the middle of the circle.
"What are you waiting on?"
the latter demanded.
"Grab them and take them to the zombie pit. We're going to have some fun this morning."
Nobody moved. Nobody spoke or cheered. They just stood there and stared. Apollo snarled, whirling on some of his most loyal men.
"Ricky, Andy, what are you waiting on?"
he demanded. Both men shook their heads, and it was then that the men holding them at gunpoint from behind made themselves visible.
"Somebody needs to tell me exactly what in the hell is going on,"
Apollo roared.
"And I mean now."
Axton's stance relaxed.
"Well, I know I haven't been around much as of late, but it would appear as though your leadership has been usurped," he drawled.
"So, you think you can just show back up and start leading things again?"
Apollo snarled, turning back to him red-faced.
"That would appear to be the case,"
Axton replied calmly.
"Do you have any idea what I'm capable of?"
Apollo yelled.
"What my men are capable of? They're not even all here. They're off in Borgia and Pampa doing what I tell them to do. They're going to be mighty pissed off when they get back here and find out you have me locked away somewhere."
Axton smirked.
"Well, for starters, it is very presumptuous of you to think you're going to be locked away somewhere," he said.
"You're not going to kill me, boy,"
Apollo snapped.
"You don't have the stones."
"Maybe I do, maybe I don't," Axton said. "But after I tell everybody what you did, I may not have to lift a finger to take care of you."
Apollo's eyes widened, and his voice went up an octave.
"Whatever you think I did,"
he stammered, shaking his head and looking desperately at the others.
"Whatever he claims I did, it's a lie. It's all a lie."
Now, why would you say I'm lying when I haven't even started talking yet?"
Axton asked, cocking a brow.
"If I didn't know better, I'd swear you had a guilty conscience."
He raised his voice, gesturing to the crowd.
"For years, we have treated this group as our family, the ground where we stand on as our sanctuary. So come, Apollo, confess your sins. Unburden yourself in front of your brothers and sisters."
Apollo glared at him, jaw tight.
"I have nothing to confess,"
he said through gritted teeth.
"Well, allow me to call your bluff, because believe me, you have plenty to confess to,"
Axton said with a shrug.
"Do you all know what some of the fringe benefits to leading this motley crew brings? Sure, we have our growing brotherhood, our growing empire."
He held up a finger and wagged it.
"But one very important benefit is the pile of cash we have stashed away. And sure, those resources belong to all of us. But if you think back to the time when I was in charge, not a single one of you wanted for anything. Food, shelter, booze, drugs, bikes. Whatever you wanted, this gang provided. Well, what it provided me with was access to the best lawyer money could buy."
He began to walk around the circle, meeting the gazes of his men as he moved, Apollo quivering behind him.
"When Levi and I were picked up all those months ago, we weren't breaking the law. We didn't have any drugs on us. We weren't breaking heads. We were just picked up by a SWAT team aiming their guns at us. Now, if that sounds peculiar to you, let me assure you, it piqued my interest as well. What could they possibly have on us? But more importantly, how did they know where we were? One of the beautiful things about our former country was our justice system. If you are accused of a crime, the prosecution must turn over the evidence they have against you. And thanks to my highly paid, possibly less than ethical lawyer, I was able to get my hands on the unredacted affidavit that put me behind bars. A detailed account of a murder I am fairly certain I did not commit, along with a whole host of other lesser charges that, if I'm being honest, was probably guilty of. But all information that was only known to the parties at hand. Now, I didn't conspire with the police to hang myself out to dry, but someone did. Some ambitious soul who wanted this gang for himself.
He turned to face Apollo dead on.
And the funny thing is, if the end of the world hadn't happened, he probably would have gotten away with it.
Apollo screamed, rushing Axton, tackling him to the ground. Before he could get in even one punch, several bikers stepped forward, hauling him back. Several others helped Axton to his feet.
I don't know about the rest of you, but judging by his reaction, which one of us do you think is telling the truth?
Axton asked, raising his chin.
I will beat you into oblivion,
Apollo spat, struggling against the hands holding onto him.
You didn't know how to run this gang, but I did. I took us to new heights. I did what is necessary to take out a weak leader.
Axton grinned.
You know, when we were upstairs in our friendly little standoff, you alluded to something. How you deal with those who betray us, he said. Well, I think it's time to put that into action.
Apollo's eyes went wild with fear.
Hey, Dax, how do you deal with betrayers these days?
Axton asked. Dax pretended to think for a beat. Motorcycle ragging used to be our go-to, as you know, he said, sounding amused. But these days, it's the zombie pen.
Well, who am I to stand in the way of progress?
Axton asked, waving his arm towards the man with extra flair.
Lead the way, my good man.
The group moved towards the back of the barn, dragging Apollo along. He screamed, frantically trying to get anybody to believe he was innocent. But it was clear he wasn't changing anyone's mind. As they came around the corner, there was a double-fenced pen. The inner pen was filled with a dozen zombies, and an outer pen about 3 yards away provided a bit of protection. Some of the bikers shoved Apollo to the ground, and he looked up at his fate, quivering in fear.
You don't have to do this, Axton,
he begged, voice wavering.
You can show mercy.
Axton paused and sighed.
You know what? You're half right, he finally said. I don't have to do this.
Relief colored Apollo's face clearly.
At least not yet,
Axton continued.
It's too easy. You deserve so much more than a simple death.
He reached down and grabbed his usurper by the shirt, pulling him up off of the ground. Soon they were nose to nose, within an inch of each other, and there was no trace of amusement or sarcasm in Axton's tone. When he spoke, it was controlled, serious anger.
You wanted a shot at the throne, but instead of being a man about it, you ran to the authorities, he said. Well, I'm going to give you your chance, in front of all of our brothers and sisters. I don't want you going to your grave wondering if things would have been different if you did things the right way.
He shoved Apollo back before taking a few steps away himself. He stretched, popping his neck and knuckles as it dawned on his opponent what he'd meant. Apollo didn't waste time, rushing forward and planting his shoulder into Axton's gut, lifting him off of the ground before he was able to regain his footing. Axton retaliated with several violent elbows to the back of his opponent's head, causing him to let up on his grip. Rather than let Apollo back up, Axton grabbed the back of his shirt and started ramming his knee into his face. Axton landed a solid blow, cracking Apollo's nose before he was able to get his hands up for defense, catching the next couple of shots with his hands. Apollo thrust upwards, breaking Axton's grip, allowing him to take a couple of steps back. But Axton remained on the attack. He rushed forward, swinging hard across his body, catching Apollo on the jaw, stunning him. Apollo swung wildly in retaliation, forcing Axton to take a step back, but not delivering a blow. Axton stood his ground, grinning, almost laughing at his pathetic attempt at offense.
Is that all you got? He asked. No wonder you took the coward's way out.
Apollo screamed, rushing forward and giving him a full-body blow. Axton braced for it, minimizing the effectiveness, and let his opponent get one more gut shot in that barely affected him before going back on the offensive. Axton managed to catch the next punch, wrapping his hand around Apollo's wrist and smacking a forceful blow into his elbow. Apollo let out an inhuman screech as the bone cracked, not fully breaking it, but enough to disable his arm. Apollo stumbled back, and Axton kept on the offensive, delivering a few gut shots of his own, holding his opponent up so he could continue to hit him. Finally, after several vicious blows, Axton set up for the final shot, a violent uppercut. The force of the punch lifted Apollo slightly off of the ground, tumbling onto his back. The wind whooshed out of him as he landed. Axton knelt down beside him, speaking in a menacing yet controlled tone.
Big difference between targeting desperate civilians and fighting against a real man, isn't it?
He asked. Apollo tried to speak, but all that came out was a series of wheezes as he struggled to catch his breath. Axton laughed.
I'm going to say this once to anybody who was following Apollo,
he declared to the crowd, getting to his feet.
Come on, step forward. I want to see who you are.
About half a dozen bikers stepped forward, a couple shoved to the forefront by others. They all looked nervous, knowing their leader's reputation.
Good, good,
Axton said, facing the group.
I'm glad to see so many of you remained loyal to me, despite my absence. As for each of you,
he paced back and forth in front of them, not looking at them directly, but he could see they were worried.
I fully believe in second chances for those who aren't outright traitors. So I am going to give each of you the chance to redeem yourself in my eyes. Give you the ability to rejoin our ranks with your sins washed away. One-time offer. And all you have to do is one simple task.
He waited a beat for effect and stepped to the side, pointing to Apollo, who was slowly trying to sit up, but he was in rough shape.
He's a traitor,
Axton said.
He betrayed me, betrayed all of us by going to the authorities. If he is willing to do that against me, he wouldn't hesitate to do it against any one of you. So I want you to show him what we do with traitors. Each of you take a limb and put him in the pen.
The bikers in question shared quick looks, but nodded, stepping forward in unison towards a terrified Apollo.
Don't touch me,
he babbled, voice hoarse from lack of breath.
Don't touch me!
He screamed as they picked him up, holding him tight as he thrashed about in vain. One of them broke rank to go over to the cage, unlocking the gate and opening it up. The rest of them tossed him inside unceremoniously, slamming the gate behind him as he tried to get up and out. He banged on the fence desperately.
You don't have to do this,
he begged.
I can just leave. Just ride off to the west. Nobody will ever see me again.
Axton walked closer, standing eye to eye with the frantic man.
You're right,
he said, voice cold.
Nobody will ever see you again.
He gave the nod, and one of the bikers pulled the chain, opening the inner door to the zombie pen. Apollo whirled around to face the zombies piling out of the cage just a few yards away. They moved towards him, and the only thing he could do was back up, reaching the corner of the cage and walking around it. The zombies went both ways, which meant he would be trapped very soon. Apollo panicked, unable to speak, just frantically running back and forth from the zombies to the back of the narrow corridor between the two fences. He made it to the back and gathered himself, as if getting ready to stand his ground. He lifted his bad arm, injured in the fight and winced in pain. He did his best to shake it off, but it was difficult. He got it in semi-working condition as the first of many zombies reached him. He reached out, grabbing the first creature by its tattered, blood-soaked shirt and pulling it past him, flinging it to the ground. He quickly darted backwards, slamming his boot into the back of its head several times, crushing its skull. As he delivered the kill shot, the next zombie in line reached out for him, its decaying fingertips touching his arm and startling him. Apollo grabbed the arm, dragging it back and slamming it against the fence. He dragged the creature's head down the fencing, shoving it to its knees before delivering a solid kick to the back of its skull, forcing bits of flesh through the mesh fencing. Apollo looked back, seeing half a dozen ghouls were still bearing down on him. So he ran down the back portion of the pen, only to be greeted by more zombies on the other side. He rushed forward, kicking a zombie in the chest forcefully, sending it crashing back into the others. He looked back and forth at the marching mobs, quickly running out of space to operate. In a desperate move, he ran towards the zombies he'd just knocked down, putting his foot on the chest of the fallen one to jump through the others. His plan would have been successful, if he had managed to jump cleanly. However, the fallen ghoul grabbed onto his ankle as he pushed off. While it wasn't enough to keep him grounded, the unexpected tug was more than enough to prevent him from gaining the necessary altitude required to clear the mob. Apollo landed face first into the chest of a large female zombie, something he might have enjoyed a couple of months ago. In this moment, however, it resulted in unrelenting fear as the creature wrapped her arms around him, pushing forward and falling on top of him. As she sank her rotted teeth into his shoulder, her friends all latched on to a flailing limb, taking a bite out of it. The thrashing and screaming lasted for several moments, before finally quieting down. The bikers watched on as the only sound that quickly filled the air was the quiet munching of hungry monsters. Finally, Axton turned back to the group, addressing them as if he hadn't been gone and just ordered the death of a usurper.
Okay now, let's get down to business, he declared. A few days ago, Apollo took a prisoner from Dalhart, whose name is...
He struggled to remember the name and looked around, finally motioning to Jackie.
Travis, she piped up. His name is Travis.
Yes, Travis,
Axton said.
If he is still alive, can somebody please bring him out here?
He is alive, boss, Dax said, but he's in rough shape. We have him resting in a cage out in the barn. Axton waited, and when he didn't move, he spread his hands.
Well, can you go get him then?
He asked, voice semi-sarcastic at having to repeat himself.
Yeah,
Dax replied, nodding furiously. I just didn't want you to be shocked at his condition.
Noted. Please go get him,
Axton said. Dax motioned to a few other bikers, who all ran off to retrieve Travis, and Jackie approached Axton.
Thank you for living up to your end of the bargain, she said. They'll be very happy to be getting Travis back alive.
He put a hand over his chest.
I am a man of my word, Jackie,
Axton said sincerely.
Now your side has to live up to their end of the bargain.
I'm sure they will, she said. Axton's eyes darkened at the commotion as the others helped Travis out of the barn. He was in rough shape, with untreated wounds and his eye swollen shut.
Somebody get that man some medical attention,
Axton barked.
I want him cleaned up and ready to go in 20. And somebody go get the horses out by the driveway.
Several bikers ran off to do his bidding, and he turned his attention back to Jackie.
Don't worry, he said. We'll get him patched up and ready to travel.
I'll make sure he gets back to town safely, and let them know what you did here, she promised.
I'm sure you will, but I'm sending a couple of men with you, he replied.
What? You don't think I can manage the trip on my own?
She shot back, jutting out her chin. He raised his palms with an amused smile.
I have all the confidence in the world in you, he said. What I don't have confidence in is the ability of Captain Ditko to keep his word. So I'm sending some emissaries to retrieve my father's watch and to deliver terms of our deal.
She pursed her lips but nodded.
Okay, I'll go help Travis get prepared for the trip, she said.
And I'll make sure you have the provisions you need to get back easily, Axton replied. And maybe find a couple of bottles of something special from their haul.
She smiled and turned to leave, but he reached out, touching her arm.
Hey, Jackie,
he said, almost bashfully. She cocked a brow.
Yeah?
She asked.
I know my gang isn't exactly on neighborly terms with the town, but I want you to know that you're welcome here any time,
Axton said, and smirked.
You know, if you get bored of small-town life and want some excitement.
She laughed.
Excitement, huh?
She asked.
You mean like drunken bashes and zombie combat?
Yeah, something like that,
Axton replied smoothly.
Good to know,
she said, and nodded, heading off to help Travis.
Levi, Kai,
A moment of your time,
Axton said, and she chanced to look back at the trio as they huddled up. She had no choice but to go with it as she approached Travis, who needed her attention way more.
Jackie, you're alive, he groaned.
And so are you, she replied with a relieved sigh.
How did...
he stammered.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about it on the ride back to Dalhart, she said gently. Just save your strength. You're going to need it.
He nodded before gazing past her, his eyes landing on Axton.
Is that who I think it is?
He asked, awe in his tone.
Yep. Fresh out of prison and back atop the Knights of Dumas, she drawled.
We can't...
He trailed off into a coughing fit.
We can trust him, Jackie said firmly. We have to.
He seemed a little leery at the situation, but was in no position to do anything about it. The two of them stayed there awkwardly, waiting for the ride home to begin. Chapter 6. Day 0 plus 46. The trip back was long and exhausting, as Travis was unable to ride very far before tiring out. The stopover outside of Cactus was uneventful at least, just 4 people resting under the stars beside a roaring fire. Even though Travis knew they were on the opposite sides of the law, nobody was tense. The battle was over, at least in their minds. With a deal in place, it was just a matter of getting everybody and everything where they were meant to be. The rest of the trip back to Dalhart was just as uneventful as the stop, albeit quiet. Travis wasn't sure what to say, and even if he was too weak to carry much of a conversation. Kai and Levi just wanted to get the job done so they could go back and party with their brothers and sisters, or in Kai's case, getting properly introduced to them. As they approached town, the sun was at its peak in the sky, shining down on them and making them easy to spot. When they made it to the intersection by the underpass, a couple of guards yelled out from the train tracks above. "That's far enough," he cried.
"What are you talking about?" Jackie yelled back, agitated. "We're coming in. Do you not recognize us?"
"I have my orders. Just sit tight," the guard called.
Kai grunted.
"What the hell is going on, Jackie?" he muttered.
"I have no idea," she replied,
shaking her head as her brow furrowed in concern.
"But believe me when I say, we're getting into town."
Several moments went by and the guard was still talking into his walkie-talkie. Jackie couldn't take it any more.
"Hey, cowboy dipshits," she barked. "Travis needs medical attention like yesterday. Now we're coming in, and if you don't like it, you can shoot us."
She jumped down from her horse, motioning for the others to come with her. Kai and Levi dismounted and helped Travis down, getting him to his feet and helping him along as they walked towards the barricade.
"Stop, or I swear I'll shoot,"
the guard cried, aiming his gun. Travis looked up at him in exasperation.
"Put your gun down, Landon," he called.
The guard, apparently Landon, looked down and shook his head, finally giving way.
"Sorry, Travis," he said with a shrug. "Mayor Collier said not to let anybody in who didn't belong here."
"Well, we belong here," Jackie snapped.
"You and Travis do," he argued. "Those 2 convicts don't."
"Hey, cowpoke, let me assure you that we're not staying around here any longer than we need to," Levi drawled. "Just have to pick something up that we're owed, and we'll be on our way."
The guard hesitated before finally lowering his gun.
"Okay," he muttered.
The 4 of them got over the barricade, helping Travis carefully. A few older cowboys drove up in a golf cart.
"Give us Travis. We'll take him to the doctor,"
the driver said, and the convicts helped him into the back seat.
"We got you, bud,"
one of the cowboys said as he got him situated.
"Man, is it good to see you again."
"Glad to be home,"
Travis replied with a tentative smile.
"Didn't think I would see this place again."
"You take good care of him now," Levi said. "He had a rough ride up here, on top of a bad few days."
The cowboys glared at him, but didn't say anything before they took off. He was a knight. Even though he wasn't directly responsible for Travis's condition, he was the easiest one to be angry with. It was this that allowed him to ignore it as they rode off.
"So what in the hell is going on?"
Kai demanded. "You keep asking me that like I know," Jackie snapped. "I've been with you guys the entire time. I'm just as lost as you are, but I know where we can get answers." She motioned for them to follow her as they walked down Main Street towards the courthouse. They walked by a few older people who just looked on with confusion and fear at the two convicts. The trio made it inside, walking to the office where Jackie had first met Captain Ditko. They entered, finding the mayor there with Alonzo and Ethan, the latter two who rushed over and hugged their friend.
"I'm so glad that you're back,"
Alonzo gushed, holding on to her longer than Ethan had.
"Everything okay?"
Ethan asked. Jackie nodded, pulling back to look at them.
"Yeah, Axton held up his end of the deal," she replied. "Overthrew Apollo and gave us Travis back." "Where is he?"
Collier asked. She jerked a thumb over her shoulder.
"Couple of your guys came and picked him up to take him to the doctor," she replied. "He's in rough shape, but he's tough. He'll pull through."
"Good, good,"
the mayor said.
"Now, you want to tell me why the guards didn't want to let us back into town?"
she demanded, crossing her arms. He blinked at her with a look of confusion that appeared genuine.
"What are you talking about?"
he asked.
"Your boy on the overpass threatened to gun us down if we didn't back off,"
Levi piped up.
"Not Jackie and Travis, mind you, just Kai and me."
"Not a great start to our deal, Mr. Mayor,"
Kai added. Collier blinked, shaking his head, clearly flabbergasted.
"I swear to you, I have no idea what is going on with that," he said.
I gave the order.
Captain Ditko bellowed from behind the convicts, who were standing in the doorway. They turned around, crossing their arms and not moving to let him through. They stared him down, and he finally sighed and waved his hand to silently ask them to move. They waited a beat and then parted reluctantly.
"Well, Captain, should we give you the benefit of the doubt and believe that your guard just misunderstood you?"
Levi asked, jutting out his chin.
"Or do we need to start taking this personal?"
Kai added. Ditko tossed a small box onto the table, talking dismissively.
You can take it however you damn well please, he said. I told my men not to allow scum of the earth into town.
Kai took a step forward, but Jackie put her hand on his chest to stop him. Ditko tapped his holstered gun with a sneer.
Yeah, that's right. You settle down now, he said.
Captain, what are you doing?
Collier demanded.
Shut the fuck up,
Ditko snapped, clearly agitated.
Sit your fat ass down and let the only grown-up in the room do the talking. You're the one who wanted to let these maniacs back out onto the street. I went along with it, because, hell, I thought Apollo was going to wipe them out.
Jackie gaped at him. You sent me to die then? She demanded.
Girl, I don't know you, and quite frankly, I don't give a damn about you,
Ditko replied, waving her off.
I care about the people in this town. That's it.
If that's true, then you need to honor your deal, Levi warned.
He's right,
Jackie added.
Axton lived up to his end of the deal. Now you need to do the same.
The captain grinned deviously, shaking his head.
If you think I'm going to have my people slave away in the fields just to hand over half of what they grow to these criminals, then you got another thing coming, he said.
Captain, may I remind you that you're not in charge?
The mayor demanded. Ditko drew his gun and aimed it at him.
Are you sure about that, Mayor? He demanded.
Collier raised his hands, hoping to calm the barrel suddenly in his face.
Why are you being a bitch about this?
Kai demanded.
If you hated us this much, why did you help us get to that storage room?
Ditko rolled his eyes.
I'll tell you the same thing I told them, he drawled. There's a big difference between keeping a man in a cage to let him starve to death and setting that man free upon the world. If I had my way, you boys would have spent the rest of your lives in that storeroom. But the fates had other ideas.
You're making a big mistake, Captain, Levi warned. Ditko turned the gun on him.
Am I now? He demanded. No, I don't think I am. I spent my life making sure scum like you weren't able to hurt innocent civilians, and I'm going to do the same right now.
He cocked the hammer back on the gun, and Jackie stepped between them instantly.
Get out of the way, girl,
Ditko warned. It's okay. Do as he says, Levi prompted. No, I'm not moving, she argued, crossing her arms. We're talking this out.
I said move,
Ditko barked, brandishing his gun.
You're going to follow Mayor Fat Ass here? The one who wants to give away our food to these criminals? Criminals who we have no way of verifying they're holding up their end of the bargain. That mayor?
Yeah, that mayor, Jackie said firmly, standing her ground. Now, we struck a deal with Axton, and we're going to honor it.
No, we're not,
Ditko snapped, and aimed at the box on the desk, pulling the trigger. The sound startled everybody, and they gaped at the destroyed box, watch parts strewn about, demolished by the bullet. He pointed the gun back at Jackie.
This is your last chance, girl, he snarled. You need to get out of the way, or I'm going to move you.
Jackie glanced at Alonzo, who was off to the side of the captain, and they shared a slight nod before he leapt into action. He darted forward, smacking the gun hand away. A bullet fired, going over everyone's heads, and the convicts tore for the door as the captain struggled with Alonzo. Several moments went by before they were able to kick the gun away from Ditko and subdue him.
Get off me,
the captain screamed.
You're letting those criminals get away!
Jackie walked over and grabbed him by the shirt before pulling him up and punching him in the head. You ever aim a gun at me again, and you damn well better pull the trigger, she cried. Because if you don't, I'm going to shove that thing so far up your ass your smile is going to be brassy. She punched him again and marched to the door. Where are you going? Ethan asked breathlessly. To see if I can catch them, she called over her shoulder. Try and put the genie back into the bottle. She ran outside as gunshots cracked in the distance. No, 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 she thought frantically, running for the barricade as more gunshots went off. 3 people laid on the ground in the street, with several more gunshots going off atop the barricade. As she approached, she spotted 2 town cowboys on the ground, injured but not dead. The other man was Levi, bleeding from a couple of gut shots. She skidded to a stop next to him, putting pressure on the wounds that caused him to wince. Get away from him! He's dangerous! One of the other cowboys that was aiming a gun at him yelled. Get the fuck away! Jackie shrieked. You have no idea what you've done! The cowboy blinked, taken aback by her tone, but backed off as instructed. She turned her attention back to Levi. You're going to be okay, she said, throat tightening as he spat up blood. He shook his head weakly. I'm bleeding good, girl, he moaned. I need to give you something. He strained to reach his back pocket, pulling out a bloody envelope with her name on it. She took it, hands shaking. What is this? She breathed. Just read it, he gasped. And for what it's worth, thanks for sticking up for me back there. He coughed once more before his body began to go limp. Levi! Jackie screamed, grabbing his chest and shaking him, watching the life drain from his eyes. She gritted her teeth, sitting back on her ass as she let him down on the ground, gripping the envelope tightly in her hand. Footsteps echoed all around her, and she glanced back to find Alonzo, Ethan, and Ditko all running towards her. On the other side, guards and cowboys came down from the barricade. Chatter erupted everywhere, but she tuned it out, opening it and reading the short note as they talked.
You see what you did? Ditko cried. I told you these boys were dangerous. 2 men shot. At least they took one of them down. What about the other one?
Exchanged some fire, somebody else said, but he got away.
Just like I thought. A coward, the captain spat, running home with his tail between his legs. They ain't gonna be back.
Jackie let out a demented chuckle, and Alonzo looked down at her, concern etched across his face. She got up, still laughing, holding the bloody note.
What's so damn funny, girl?
Ditko snapped. She slammed the note against his chest as she walked by, heading off towards town.
Whatever happens next is on you, she called over her shoulder. Hope you're ready for it. She flipped him off before heading to the courthouse. Alonzo ripped the paper away from Ditko, reading it aloud. Okay, it's from Axton, and it's addressed to Jackie, he said shakily. Jackie, my hope is that you never read this letter. However, if you are, then my worst fears about Captain Ditko have been confirmed, and he has reneged on our deal. The captain muttered obscenities under his breath. I don't want you to worry, though, Alonzo read, raising his voice over Ditko's, because I have no desire for more bloodshed if the only casualty is my father's watch. While I desire to possess it, it's just an object and not worth spilling blood over. He paused, letting out a defeated sigh as he continued. However, if anything should happen to Levi or Kai, then my hand will be forced.
Oh, for fuck's sake,
Ditko huffed. I can't keep this gang under control if I show weakness, and losing men to a liar and not doing anything about it certainly qualifies as weakness. Alonzo read, raising his voice even more. If this unfortunate incident is to occur, I can assure you that my friends and I will be paying the town of Dalhart a visit, and it will not be a friendly one. I don't know when it will happen, but the town of Dalhart will pay for the sins of Captain Ditko. That said, you and your friends don't have to pay for their crimes. My door is open to you and yours, and that is a standing offer. Sincerely, Axton.
Son of a bitch,
Ditko snapped. That's not all, Alonzo said quickly. It says, P.S. If Ditko is still standing, tell him I know about the Connors store. The captain's eyes went wide as saucers.
My God, it's going to be a bloodbath,
he breathed. Alonzo slammed the bloody paper back into his chest as he went after Jackie. Hope it was worth your little power trip, he snapped. Ditko stood there, staring at the bloody paper, then staring at his wounded men on the street. Chapter 7. Day 0 plus 47. The sun rose above the horizon, bathing the small room that Jackie was in. Normally, this would wake her up, but she had been up for hours, despite her exhaustion. Alonzo came into the room in a bit of an excited state. Jackie, you up? He asked eagerly. She sighed. Yeah. What's going on? She asked. Something's going on, he replied. We gotta get to Wild Bill's house. She furrowed her brow in confusion, but got up, figuring she could use some coffee anyway. Alonzo led her out of the small downtown building and over to a golf cart, where he punched the gas as soon as she was situated. She rubbed her eyes. We got time to stop for... No, we don't, he replied, shaking his head. She furrowed her brow in concern as they raced towards a nearby neighborhood. They approached a large brick house with numerous antenna wires running the length of the yard. If nothing else, he should be getting reception, Jackie muttered as she followed Alonzo up to the house. Mayor Collier stood at the door waving them in. We miss anything? Alonzo asked. Collier shook his head. Still waiting for them to come back on, he said. Somebody want to tell me what the hell is going on? Jackie demanded, finished with the vagueness.
I'll tell you what's going on.
A booming voice came from the garage, where there was a large ham radio set up. Wild Bill sat in front of it, an older, balding white gentleman, flanked by Ethan and Captain Ditko.
I've won the I told you so card to play against my wife until the end of time, because all that stuff outside paid off big time.
Jackie sighed. Paid off how? She asked. Ditko took a deep breath.
A few,
she pointed at him, eyes like daggers. You don't say another word to me, she snapped. The captain gritted his teeth, backing down.
A few days ago, the mayor asked me to start calling around the region, seeing if I could find someone to help us with our little biker problem,
Wild Bill explained.
Had a lot of misses, people too far away, not able to help, and a couple of invites to vacation if we ever want to get away for a bit, but not help.
He rubbed his hands together.
Until an hour ago.
Okay, What happened an hour ago? Jackie prompted, rolling her hand in the air.
Made contact with a group who might be able to help,
Wild Bill explained.
The guy I talked to wasn't in charge, but said they'd take it to their higher-ups, see if something could be done. And now we're just waiting for them to come back on.
Jackie sighed. That's it, she groaned. You got me out of bed and refused to stop for coffee for something who isn't even on the line yet? Wild Bill waved a hand.
Oh, we have plenty of coffee,
he drawled.
Help yourself. It's on the counter.
Finally, a reasonable person, she muttered, and turned to get a cup of brew when the line came back. Hello? A female voice came through. Wild Bill leaned forward excitedly.
Hey there, I got you, girl, he said.
Who am I speaking with? She asked.
The name's Wild Bill, and I'm up here in Dalhart, the Panhandle of Texas, he said politely.
Nice to meet you, Wild Bill, she replied.
So, your operator there said they'd tell you what our situation was,
he prompted slowly. He did, she said. Bill hesitated, then asked.
So, what do you think?
Sounds like quite the predicament you're in, she said. He sighed.
My dear, that is quite an understatement.
There was a long silence, and he leaned forward again.
It has occurred to me that I'm being a little rude. I never asked your name.
There was another long silence, and then the woman said, My name is Lacey Sparks, and I think I can help.
The end.